You do mention, though, that some of the fixes for disparities did worsen over time. And I'm wondering, as a prominent conservative thinker, but also as an African American, whether African Americans have been slighted or pushed aside by market forces having nothing more to do with them than the color of their skin. What do you say?
I think that the attempts to make things better are one of the major reasons that things have gotten worse. I go in the book, for example, I go into minimum wage laws.
Right.
And, you know, I start with a period in which the minimum wage laws were ineffective because of the inflation.
But you also argued before they came into effect, there was even unemployment rates between black and white youths, right?
That's right. That as of 1948, right. 16 and 17-year-old black workers had a slightly lower unemployment rate than white workers the same age, and both of them had unemployment rates that are a fraction of what they are now. That made a special impression on me because I was one of those people. I left home when I was 17, and thank heaven the minimum wage law was ineffective and I could find jobs.
And we should just say that since they came up with that fix, the disparity really increased. Others, those who don't agree with you, say it had nothing to do with that. I'll just leave that debate out there. But you do mention other fixes where the government has gotten involved or tried to say that when it comes to housing, for example, to help those to afford a house and what is the income level at which you would get that help. Later in your book, you say why a family's decision to live in expensive San Francisco should be subsidized by the taxpayers. This is one of my favorite parts of the book. Including taxpayers with family incomes under $100,000 is a question that does not even arise in this context, where words with arbitrary meanings and categorical consequences guide government decisions. In other words, those same people have the option of not living in said city, San Francisco, but it almost seems callous to say that they can't, you say?
Well, yes, because the government has defined low-income people as families making less than $100,000 who live in San Francisco because of the high rents in San Francisco and the high cost of housing in general. But people who are making less than $100,000 a year are having to pay taxes so people can choose to live in this extremely expensive place when there are lots of other places in the United States where you can live decently without making $100,000 a year.
But what is it in statistics, and you just present a blitzkrieg of data that I found very interesting, anecdotal and kind of just an eye-popping moment. You referred to the fact when it comes to golf, for example, that most pros never win a single PGA championship, yet just 3 golfers, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Tiger Woods, between them have won over 200 PGA tournaments. And statistically, you see variations of this in almost every major sport, industry, what have you. Why does that happen, and why did you choose to mention in the context of discrimination and disparities?
Because of the assumption that there wouldn't be disparities unless somebody was doing somebody wrong. And you see those disparities in everywhere you look. In nature itself, most people are unaware, over 90% of all the tornadoes in the entire world occur in one country, and that's the United States. You don't hear about tornadoes in France or China or places like that. And it's because tornadoes require a lot of factors to come together. And all those factors are spread out around the world. But only in one place do you find all of them coming together at the same time. And so that's where the great bulk of the tornadoes occur. But it's that way with many other things. There are all kinds of factors going into most meaningful efforts. And unless you get all of them coming together, you don't get success in that endeavor.
You know, I'm reminded of John Kennedy, who said life is intrinsically unfair, referring at the time to those who serve in war at home, pushing papers. I'm vastly trivializing his remarks, and those who serve elsewhere. Robert Kennedy, his brother, had famously said when it came to welfare that we must find an alternative to that, and work is that. 2 noted liberals there who just had a different view of things. You mentioned early in the book about this study, I think the early part of the last century, on nearly 1,500 people with IQs of 140 or more, which is about 130 points more than my IQ, for example. And yet, of that group, 20%, I guess, whatever they did in life was deemed disappointing considering how smart they were. Could the government have helped that? Could the government have improved those odds for this elite group?
No, one of the factors that was missing among those people was that something like 30% of their parents, 30% of them had at least one parent who had quit school before the 8th grade. So they're brilliant, but they are not brought up the same as people whose parents have gone to college, who have books, magazines, and all the things that go into success in later life. And therefore, being the top 1% of IQ was just not enough to cut it.
So is the government there? Does it have a responsibility to step in and say, you have a genius child? You, because of your experience, might not see the importance of that and how unique his or her set of brains is, but we will take that responsibility from you.
That. What the government is far more likely to do is to subsidize bad behavior so that more and more children from low-income backgrounds have only one parent, which is really a tremendous handicap. And so the things that they tend to subsidize are usually things that are counterproductive.
You know, you're going to get a lot of heat on this book, as you've had and you've dealt with very eloquently in the past on some other books. But you do talk as well about those who are kingmakers for a time aren't necessarily going to be kingmakers for all time. I think you mentioned the example of Eastman Kodak and how it ruled the film world, and then digital technology came along and they completely missed the boat, and now it's Eastman who. What were you trying to say there?
Well, I was trying to point out that if you have multiple prerequisites, then missing just one of those prerequisites can drop you from the top to the bottom. And that's what happened with Eastman Kodak. I mean, Eastman Kodak was worldwide. I mean, I bought Kodak film, and in London, Paris, Singapore, Sydney, anywhere in the world. And they had 140,000 employees around the world. And in just about a decade or so, they went from that to bankruptcy.
No,
Eastman Kodak is out of the photographic business now. I think there's some little remnant of them that does something else now.
You know, Thomas, you're a little bit older than I, but I would imagine that I had more advantages than you growing up. It might not just be the color of my skin, but advantages that were to me that didn't go to you. So a lot of people who hear this minorities in general might say, well, it's easy for Thomas Sowell to say so now. He is a huge deal. He is an international bestseller. He is one of the great minds of this century. But his is a special case, and he shouldn't ignore the opportunity for government to make more special cases. You say what?
The fact that the government has an opportunity to do the right thing in no way guarantees that it won't do the wrong thing. You have to look at what political incentives are. And the political incentives are for them to do things that look good right now. You can run up an enormous set of examples of where they stepped into a situation and just ruined it. And I think that, that's not just confined to the United States. You can see the very same phenomenon in England, in New Zealand, you name it.
Thomas Sowell, I thank you for this book, Discrimination and Disparities. It does make you think, no matter the color of your skin, about the responsibility of government and whether it can compound a bad situation and make it worse, as he seems to indicate, and gives alarming proof in cases, one right after the other. So much common sense in one book. Thomas Sowell, thank you very much.